Bonjour, Marnie. Ça va?
Ça va bien? And you?
Ça va, merci, merci.
Oh, okay. The connection is perfect. We also put our earphones on. It's better.
Yes, I'm also sitting in a coffee house because I was going to plan it to do it at home, but there are people at home. So, yeah, so it's better here. And,
Okay. Good.
mhm,
Coffee time. Good.
yes, coffee time.
Okay. How are
All
you
right.
today, Tony?
I am quite well. I had a rather disturbing incident last night with a Lyft passenger who he was very drunk and he began to spout racist notions, uh, uh, saying, hey, you don't know what it's like to be white in a black neighborhood. And I said, no, I know what it's like to be black in a black neighborhood. Then it became about, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Splatter, Black Lives Matter. So 5 minutes into the ride, I said, I'm not taking this anymore. So I canceled the ride, had to get him out of my vehicle. He wouldn't exit the vehicle, so I had to call the police. And the police got him out. Yeah. So I think, my ancestral spiritual guardian angel squad kept me calm and collected. And so, yeah, it was an adrenaline rush, but the incident was resolved. No one was harmed. Only his drunken ego was bruised, and he was taken by the cops somewhere else, out of mind, out of
Okay.
sight. But we're here. This is why we do this.
Yes. Thank you, Tony. Well, that's an introduction,
Yes,
and
but
that's
yeah, I am well, and I am glad and honored and privileged to be doing this with you.
I'm so happy to be here with you, Tony. We are online. One day we'll be in presence, and today we are online, which is amazing because some people can see us and see after that because it's going to be recorded. This is a conference about Frederick Douglass on this Black History Month.
Yes.
And we're going to talk, yes, about this man, Frederick Douglass. He will appear among us thanks to his writing, because he wrote an autobiography, and because of Tony's voice. Tony, my friend and actor, we've been knowing each other since 14 years now.
15.
15 years.
Yes. It's always longer than it actually seems.
Exactly. And Frederick Douglass will appear thanks to also my voice as a narrator and thanks to your imagination, you people listening to this conference and reading. So are you ready to meet Frederick Douglass? I am sure that a lot of people already know him, especially in the States. In my country, he's not as known as in America. So I really want to do this conference in French soon with you, Tony, as well, French-American conference. But now we are Pacific time now in California, both of us. So let's talk in English. French will be the next challenge.
Yes.
In any case, I hope this conference will give you an opportunity to rediscover or discover the intense life of this man, Frederick Douglass. In fact, Frederick Douglass inspired the creation of Black History Month in America because the founder of Black History Month, a Black American historian named Carter Godwin Woodson, decided to launch in 1926 the celebration of Black history, precisely in February, to recall two highly symbolic dates. First, the birthday of Lincoln, February 12, 1809, and the birthday of Frederick Douglass, February 14th, 1818. So are you ready to do this travel in space and time? Because Tony and I are very ready, n'est-ce pas?
Mm-hmm. I am ready.
So time will be 19th century. Space will be the United States, especially the state of Maryland, tiny little state of Virginia, west of Delaware, south of Pennsylvania. I said that just because, okay, American citizens will know, but some international won't know what it is, this specific Maryland land. It's a very tiny little state. This is when little Frederick was born there in 1818 in that southern state in the East Coast, and his name was not Frederick Douglass. It's a name that he renamed himself when he was 20 years old. In 1818, his name was Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey. Why? Because he was named after his mother's name. His mother is Harriet Bailey. She was black, she was enslaved, and in what Europeans used to call the New World, where you can see plantations of tobacco, sugarcane, coffee, cocoa, cotton, where wealth is based on the slave trade. This is the rule. This was the rule, the matrix of that time in the southern states. You are black, you are enslaved, and so is Harriet Bailey. The identity of Frederick's father is not verified, but we know that he was white. He supposedly was the head of the plantation where Frederick's mother worked.
The opinion was also whispered that my master was my father.
These are Frederick's words in his first autobiography titled
Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave.
So we will mainly focus in this conference on this text published in 1845 in Boston, in America. Frederick was 27 when his first autobiography was published. Frederick is born from Aaron Anthony the Master and Harriet the enslaved woman. He was ripped from his mother at a very young age, as it was the custom to separate the children of their mother to avoid any form of attachment. He says he only saw his mother 4 or 5 times in his life, and he was raised by his grandmother. Let's listen to what he writes at the beginning of his autobiography.
My mother and I was separated when I was but an infant, before I knew her as my mother. It is a common custom in the part of Maryland from which I ran away to part children from their mothers at a very early age. Frequently, before the child has reached its 12th month, its mother is taken from it and hired out on some farm a considerable distance off, and the child is placed under the care of an old woman, too old for field labor. For what this separation is done, I do not know, unless it be to hinder the development of the child's affection towards its mother and to blunt and destroy the natural affection of the mother for the child. This is the inevitable result.
According to the one-drop law at that time, Frederick is the son of a black enslaved woman, so he will be enslaved his whole life. Frederick explains,
the whisper that my master was my father may or may not be true, and true or false. It is of but little consequence to my purpose whilst the fact remains in all its glaring odiousness that slaveholders have ordained and by law established that the children of slave women shall in all cases follow the condition of their mothers. And this is done too obviously to administer to their own lusts and to make a gratification of their wicked desires profitable as well as pleasurable. For by this cunning arrangement, the slaveholder, in cases not a few, sustains to his slaves the double relation of master and father.
we can then imagine how, while the American goal was to separate colors and races, in the plantations, the country engendered a great amount of half-breeds people, not to mention the half-breeds generated within the indigenous people. So this sounds like a great irony of history, and that is what Frederick Douglass points out and illustrates, because his miscegenation is at the heart of this great irony. In the 19th century, we are in a time of transition for slaves' condition of life in the world that will lead to abolitions in the middle of the century, but when little Frederick is born in 1818, we are far from this idea of freedom. So let's see how history draws a path to this transition. In fact, Frederick is born and begins life in a state and at a time when it is an established fact that races are hierarchical. This hierarchy is established by the white man who, in a context of colonial conquest, arrogated to himself not only the supremacy over all other races, but especially the mission of converting and civilizing the so-called inferior race. This civilizing mission quickly turned into an abuse of authority, with the mistreatment inflicted on enslaved blacks by their master. Acts of violence remain unpunished because, by definition at that time, the white man is right and the enslaved black is wrong. In this context happens what I would call the blood baptism or blood state gate, as Frederick Douglass says in his autobiography. He's not even 6 years old when he witnesses a tragic scene between his aunt Hester and his master.
He was a cruel man, hardened by a long life of slaveholding. He would at times seem to take great pleasure in whipping a slave. I have often been awakened at the dawn of day by the most heartrending shrieks of an own aunt of mine, whom he used to tie up to a joist and whip upon her naked back till she was literally covered with blood. No words, no tears, no prayers from his gory victim seemed to move his iron heart from its bloody purpose. The louder she screamed, the harder he whipped, and where the blood ran fastest, there he whipped longest. He would whip her to make her scream, and whip her to make her hush, and not until overcome by fatigue would he cease to swing the blood-clotted cowskin. I remember the first time I ever witnessed this horrible exhibition. I was quite a child, but I well remember it. I never shall forget it whilst I remember anything. It was the first of a long series of such outrages of which I was doomed to be a witness and a participant. It struck me with awful force. It was the blood-stained gate, the entrance to the hell of slavery through which I was about to pass. It was a most terrible spectacle. I wish I could commit to paper the feelings with which I beheld it.
Cruelty and barbarism. Little Frederick knows that he belongs to a master who has the right to kill or save his life. Frederick Douglass writes the maxim of the slave's owner. According to his master, it is better to see a dozen slaves receive whipping badly than to see an inspector convinced in their presence to have been wrong. Thus, he witnesses many enslaved blacks being killed by their master. Terrible crimes remain unpunished because, he says, we must dissuade any other rebellion by teaching the enslaved blacks to become impossible to discipline. The plantation on which he grows up produces tobacco, grains, and wheat. There are 300 to 400 slaves on Colonel Lloyd's plantation. Living conditions are very little to eat, clothes for a year, 2 shirts, a jacket, winter trousers, a pair of stockings, a pair of shoes, total value $7 maximum. Children who do not work in the fields do not have shoes, stockings, jackets, or trousers, only 2 shirts per year. When the shirts are damaged, the children are naked until the next allowance. No bed, only a rough blanket. Frederick Douglass writes that they suffer less from lack of bed than lack of sleep. Waking up obediently, otherwise punishment by the way. Frederick cannot work in the field, so he has a lot of hobbies, and his job is to bring back the cows in the evening, to prevent the chicken from entering the garden, to clean the yard, buy things for the daughter of his old master. He is rarely whipped, put under the protection of the owner's son. So here is the big transition of his life. In 1826, he's still young. He's about 8 years old. He is sent to Baltimore, leaving the plantation of Colonel Lloyd to get to pure old brother of the son-in-law of his former master. He feels chosen among the children of the plantation to move to the big city where blacks are better treated than in the countryside. He expresses for the first time his gratitude to God and his tutelary angels, faith and hope. Everything in Baltimore is exciting and gives him the promise of a better future. His new role is to look after Thomas Old, the little boy in the family. In addition, he discovers his new mistress, Sophia Old, whom he takes for an angel of goodness. But he will then turn into a fatal poison, he said. It is 1827. Sophia begins to teach the alphabet to the young Frederick, who is 9 years old. She helps him to spell words of 2 or 3 letters. But the learning stops because her husband discovers it, and here are the words reported by Frederick.
To use his own words further, he said, "If you give a nigger an inch, he will take an apple. A nigger should know nothing but to obey his master, to do as he is told. Learning would spoil the best nigger in the world. Now," said he, "if you teach that nigger, speaking of myself, how to read, there would be no keeping him. It would forever unfit him to be a slave. It would at once become unmanageable and of no value to his master. As to himself, it could do him no good, but a great deal of harm. It would make him discontented and unhappy." These words sank deep into my heart, stirred up sentiments within that lay slumbering, and called into existence an entirely new train of thought. It was a new and special revelation explaining dark and mysterious things with which my youthful understanding had struggled, but struggled in vain. I now understand what had been to me a most perplexing difficulty, to wit, the white man's power to enslave the black man. It was a grand achievement, and I prized it highly. From that moment, I understood the pathway from slavery to freedom. It was just what I wanted, and I got it at a time when I least expected it. Whilst I was saddened by the thought of losing the aid of my kind mistress, I was gladdened by the invaluable instruction which, by the merest accident, I had gained from my master.
I consider that 1827 is a hinge year. The famous figure of self-made man starts to emerge, which will lead Frederick Bailey to so-called slave, to Frederick Douglass, the free man. Indeed, this pivotal year marks his entry into reading, a step in education, which is the keystone of his emancipation. Let's go forward in time and hear a paragraph of one of his speeches of 1872. He is 54 years old. Since he was 40, he explains and theorizes this class of society, the self-made man of America, these men who created their own life.
There are men who, in the world of schools, academies, colleges, and other institutions of learning, are often compelled by unfriendly circumstances to acquire their education elsewhere and, amidst unfavorable conditions, to hew out for themselves a way to success and thus to become the architects of their own good fortunes. They are, in a peculiar sense, indebted to themselves for themselves. If they have traveled far, they have made the road on which they have traveled. If they have ascended high, they have built their own ladder. From the depths of poverty such as these have often come. From the heartless pavements of a large and crowded city, barefooted, homeless, and friendless, they have come. From hunger, rags, and destitution, they have come. Motherless and fatherless, they have come, and may come. Flung overboard in the midnight storm on the broad and tempest-tossed ocean of life, left without ropes, planks, oars, or life preservers, they have bravely buffeted the frowning billows and have risen in safety and life where others supplied with the best appliances for safety and success have fainted, despaired, and gone down forever.
This is exactly what happens to him. He starts his marginal life, he braves each obstacle and makes every difficulty the occasion of his rebound and a burst of courage to reach his goal, to rise, to emancipate, to become a free man, even if it was not what was determined by its primary condition. How? By reading. His mistress put him on the path, and then he will have a plan, a ploy, to make friends with the little whites, to learn to read with them, and to feed his craving curiosity. Thus, he learns to read with tenacity and patience. The young Frederick, 12 years old, compares himself to white children and feels that he cannot take the idea of being a so-called slave for life. Then he finds the Colombian Orator, a collection of speeches about rhetoric published in 1797 in Boston. Two texts in particular draw his attention: a speech between a master and his slave, and a speech by Sheridan of the Catholic faith. This new reading opens the door to another possible for him. Personally, by reading this part of the autobiography, I was very moved by Frederick Douglass' words. In fact, I have been a teacher since 2000, and I have experienced what it is to welcome students to a new world, new consciousness through language, reading, and writing. So Frederick Douglass writes his autobiography when he was 27. As an adult, he reflects on the little boy he was, awakening and blossoming thanks to the treasure that is a book. Learning how to speak and write helps us to give form to our thoughts. And the more our thoughts are articulated, nuanced, engaged, the more it allows us to manifest who we want to become. That is exactly what happens to the little Frederick. Let's read what he says about the two texts he discovered in the Colombian Orator.
In the same book, I met with one of Sheridan's mighty speeches on and in behalf of Catholic emancipation. These were choice documents to me. I read them over and over again with unabated interest. They gave tongue to interesting thoughts of my own soul, which had frequently flashed through my mind and died away for want of utterance.
But there is a paradox. And this is also one of the characteristics of the life of a self-made man, the challenge. What is Frederick's challenge? His exaltation in learning at the same time puts the child into despair because he learns, he gains education, but
it had given me a view of my wretched condition without the remedy.
At the beginning, Frederick Douglass witnessed the enslaved blacks being victims of cruelty, but his desire to get out of his condition was not expressed. There was resignation, an acceptance of his situation. But from now on, Frederick Douglass is taken by what he describes as the torment of thinking. Since words had appeared before his eyes as a young reader, concepts and realities are now named. They existed even more tangible. Words create reality, impossible to escape the challenge.
I preferred the condition of the meanest reptile to my own. Anything, no matter what, to get rid of thinking. It was this everlasting thinking of my condition that tormented me. There was no getting rid of it. It was pressed upon me by every object within sight or hearing, animate or inanimate. The silver trump of freedom had roused my soul to eternal wakefulness. Freedom now appeared to disappear no more forever. It was heard in every sound and seen in everything. It was ever present to torment me with the sense of my wretched condition. I saw nothing without seeing it. I heard nothing without hearing it, and felt nothing without feeling it. It looked from every star. It smiled in every calm, breathed in every wind, and moved in every storm.
As proof that words create reality, Frederick discovers the word abolition without knowing first its meaning. He explains that he was seeking the definition in the dictionary. Then he finds a newspaper article containing requests for petitions sent from the North calling for the abolition of slavery in the District of Columbia in the slave trade between the United States. From word to meaning, from meaning to reality, isn't it the door that education can open? Then things are accelerating for Frederick Douglass. He's about 12 years old. His challenge and decision are very clear now. He knows that he will run away. But first, he will have to learn how to write. And this is the second action of the self-made man. After almost self-learning reading, self-learning writing. And how? By being very resourceful and smart. Two qualities that are crucial for the self-made man. And how is this new learning process? While working in a shipyard, he sees the carpenter who, after cutting a piece of wood, mark it by engraving the name of the vessel's part. P for port, S for starboard. Then, when he met a boy who knew how to write, he told him that he could write as well as he, and the other replied.
After that, when I met with any boy who I knew could write, I would tell him I could write as well as he. The next word would be, I don't believe you. Let me see you try it. I would then make the letters which I had been so fortunate as to learn and ask him to beat that. In this way, I got a good many lessons in writing, which it is quite possible I should never have gotten any other way. During this time, my copybook was the board fence, the brick wall, and pavement. My pen and ink was a lump of chalk. With these, I learned mainly how to write. I then commenced and continued copying the italics in Webster's spelling book until I could make them all without looking on the book. By this time, my little master Thomas had gone to school and learned how to write and had written over a number of copybooks. These had been brought home and shown to some of our near neighbors and then laid aside. My mistress used to go to class reading at the Wilk Street Reading House every Monday afternoon and leave me to take care of the house. When left thus, I used to spend the time in writing in the spaces left in Master Thomas's copybook, copying what he had written. I continued to do this until I could write by hand very similar to that of Master Thomas. Thus, after a long, tedious effort for years, I finally succeeded in learning how to write.
The shaping of the self-made man continued. In March 1832, Frederick Douglass was 14 years old and he left Baltimore, returned to St. Michael's at Captain Thomas Hall. He suffers for the first time from hunger because his master was really greedy. In this new period of his life, he discovers faith and how a master can use religion as a support to punish slaves, which ignites his rebellion. All this reinforces his indignation for injustice and consequently his dream for freedom. In 1833, at the age of 15, he was leased to Edward Covey, who had the reputation of taming young slaves. For the first time in his life, he worked in the field. He stayed there 1 year with this master called the Snake. The first 6 months, the master whipped him every week without any reason.
I was somewhat unmanageable when I first went there, but a few months of this discipline tamed me. Mr. Covey succeeded in breaking me. I was broken in body, soul, and spirit. My natural elasticity was crushed. My intellect languished. The disposition to read departed. The cheerful spark that lingered about my eye died. The dark night of slavery closed in upon me, and behold, a man transformed into a brute. Sunday was my only leisure time. I spent this in a sort of beast-like stupor between sleep and wake under some large tree. At times I would rise up. A flash of energetic freedom would dart through my soul, accompanied with a faint beam of hope that flickered for a moment and then vanished. I sank down again, mourning over my wretched condition. I was sometimes prompted to take my life and that of Kobe, but was prevented by a combination of hope and fear. My sufferings on this plantation seem now like a dream rather than a stern reality.
You have witnessed the strength of young Frederick and how Covey, the tamer, sabotaged in one single year Frederick's several years of determination. But again, like a self-made man who, like a phoenix, is reborn from the ashes, in the middle of the adversity, Frederick finds the strength to stand up. Listen to his psychological evolution from the shadow of doubt to the light of hope.
Oh, why was I born a man of whom to make a brute? The glad ship is gone. She hides in a dim distance. I am left in the hottest hell of unending slavery. Oh, God, save me. God, deliver me. Let me be free. Is there any God? Why am I a slave? I will run away. I will not stand it. Get caught or get clear, I'll try it. I had as well die with ague as the fever. I have only one life to lose. I had as well be killed running as die standing. You have seen how a man was made a slave. You shall see how a slave was made a man.
Third pivotal episode, the physical fight with Covey. Imagine Frederick being totally drained by an abusive work and lashes. He's seriously injured and even sick. He decides to travel 7 miles to St. Michael's and Master Thomas to ask for protection, but his request fails. Back to Covey's. While Covey is about to whip him, Frederick defends himself and dares what none would have dared before. He will fight for 2 hours with the man. He will see fear on his master's face. Finally, Covey is out of breath. He bleeds while Frederick does not bleed at all. Frederick defeated his master, which will never touch him anymore. Apparently, Covey had preferred to ignore the defeat, otherwise his reputation as a slave trainer would have been dull.
This battle with Mr. Covey was the turning point in my career as a slave. It rekindled the few expiring embers of freedom and revived within me a sense of my own manhood. It recalled the departed self-confidence and inspired me again with a determination to be free. It was a glorious resurrection from the tomb of slavery to the heaven of freedom. My long-crushed spirit rose, cowardice departed, bold defiance took its place, and now I resolved that however long I might remain a slave in form, the day has passed forever when I could be a slave in fact.
In 1834, Frederick is hired by William Freeland. About this new master, he says,
I will give Mr. Freeland the credit of being the best master I ever had, till I became my own master.
In this new expectation, he experiments the transmission of his knowledge because he is authorized to open a Sunday school to teach his fellow slaves how to read.
They came because they wished to learn. Their minds had been starved by their cruel masters. They had been shut up in a mental darkness. I taught them because it was the delight of my soul to be doing something that looked like bettering the condition of my race.
His vocation is clear: to guide others to acquire their own independence. His leadership is manifested by an attempt to escape with 5 enslaved friends in 1835, but this failed. Frederick spends 1 week in jail. He is separated from his friends and sent back to Baltimore, where he will learn the craft of caulking, stealing a ship so that he does not sink, a pretty metaphor for his life. This way, he earns his own money, but must then give it to his master, which ignites his rebellion. Fourth episode of his transformation: the fighting for financial independence. Frederick reveals his escape roadmap only in the second autobiography of 1855, called My Bondage, My Freedom, published when he was 37, because 10 years earlier, in the first autobiography, he obviously takes the precaution not to say too much about the fugitives' secret, the slaves who will follow his example. Here is how the escape happened. On September 3rd, 1838, in less than 24 hours, Frederick, disguised as a sailor with the identity papers of a free black sailor, flees by train to Baltimore towards Havre de Grace in Maryland. He crosses the Susquehanna River, takes a train to Wilmington, Delaware, reaches Philadelphia by boat, and finally arrives in New York City on September 4th. He changed his name to Frederick Johnston. He gets married to Anna Murray, who joins him. He had met her the year before. Both go to New Bedford in Massachusetts, and he renames himself Frederick Douglass, inspired by a historical poem, The Lady Lake by Sir Walter Scott. He lived 3 years illegally as an agricultural worker, subscribes to the abolitionist journal Liberator, which gives him even more momentum to the 5th episode of his life as a self-made man, August 11, 1841, the moment of the inner fight. This is a fight against himself and against his lack of confidence. He speaks and testifies on Nantucket Island at a meeting organized by the Anti-Slavery Society. William Lloyd Garrison, president of the company, immediately admires his talent as a speaker. Listen to Frederick Douglass speaking while being afraid.
The truth was, I felt myself a slave, and the idea of speaking to white people weighed me down. I spoke but a few moments, when I felt a degree of freedom and said what I had desired with considerable ease. From that time until now, I have been engaged in pleading the cause of my brethren. With what success and with what devotion.
Now, let us give you a few other dates showing the evolution of his career. 1843, he begins a tour of 6-month conference as a garrison agent. 1845, Tony.
Oh, in 1845, he publishes his first autobiography, then leaves for England because he risks his life according to the law of fugitive slaves.
December 5th, 1846, Frederick Douglass's friends pay for his freedom from his master Thomas Holt. With more money, Frederick creates his newspaper, the North Star. He is a free man. He is 28 years old.
In 1848, he gives a speech at the first Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls, New York.
1851, he breaks the relationship with Garrison to become more involved in politics.
In 1855, he is 37 years old and publishes his second autobiography, a longer, revised version of his first book.
During the American Civil War, he actively engaged to allow Black people to fight alongside Union fighters. 2 of his sons will fight. His strong position questions Black slavery and will contribute, leading to the emancipation of the Black people.
The abolition of slavery in his country was decreed by Abraham Lincoln on December 13th, 1865, as a 13th Amendment of the Constitution. Frederick Douglass was 47 years old at that time.
1881, he is 63 years old, and he publishes his 3rd autobiography under the title Life and Time of Frederick Douglass. So, as a free man, he has been president of Freedmen's Saving Bank,
Marshal of the District of Columbia,
Consul General of Republic of Haiti,
Charge d'Affaires for the Dominican Republic.
He died at age 77 on February 20, 1895. To quote his own words, now we can say,
"We have seen how a man was made a slave. We have seen how a slave was made a man."
As a conclusion, I told you at the very beginning of my speech that I met Frederick Douglass 10 years ago. I don't know if I told you that, but I tell you now.
Yes.
I met him 10 years ago. I tell you, I met him 10 years ago because I was at that time a small bookworm sitting in the National Library in Paris. Why? Because I was doing research about the gold rush and some French travel journals, and I was studying the period of that time. I was trying to find where the American expression self-made man came from. And yes, so for me, conditioned by my Western education, I thought it was an invention from the Europeans arriving on the so-called new continent. You know?
Right.
So when I suddenly discovered that the true origin of this mythical expression, self-made man, was invented by Frederick Douglass, and I made research about who he is. That's how I discovered the whole picture.
Right.
It was an eye-opener.
Right.
Yeah, it was amazing. So I wanted to know, Tony, about you. When did you hear? When did you learn the first time about Frederick?
Well, I was a kid. I was very young. I was in the 4th grade when we learned about, slavery, and around that time, the television miniseries Roots, starring LeVar Burton as Kunta Kinte, written by Alex Haley, had been airing on ABC on television. So there was a whole thing about this relearning of Black history, and that's when I was introduced to Black History Month and learning about Frederick Douglass, about who he was, an ex-slave who had ran away and joined the abolitionist movement and became an abolitionist. And we also learned about John Brown, from which he was acquainted. John Brown was a white man who was very passionate about the abolition of slavery. In fact, he actively went out and, beat up and fought slave owners. He led the ill-fated raid on Harper's Ferry, if you know about him, yes. And incredible man. And Frederick Douglass was quoted as saying, "This man is passionate about freeing my people, more passionate about freeing my people than I am." And so learning about Frederick Douglass, learning about the abolition of slavery, Harriet Tubman, the Underground Railroad, all of these networks are interconnected. And when we talk about how Mr. Covey had broken Frederick Douglass, there is an area in that Baltimore, Maryland area where we talked about called Mount Mercy. Now, Frederick Douglass was not the only slave that was broken. There were many problem slaves that were broken there. And this man, Covey, had an instruction. This is how you break a slave, buck breaking. breaking their spirit, breaking their mind, breaking their heart. And, they were beaten and tortured there. Ironically, I learned about this when George W. Bush was president, and the owner of that property, Mount Mercy, is none other than the author of the rendition and torture himself, Dick Cheney, Vice President Dick Cheney, who lives down the road from his best friend, Donald Rumsfeld. The irony is not lost. And when we talk about how he spoke at the Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls, New York,
yes.
Right. He was good friends with none other than Susan B. Anthony. So he was a supporter of the women's suffrage because he saw intersectionality between abolition and women's rights. And of course,
already.
Right. And of course, Susan B. Anthony, when men were given the right to vote, when black men were given the right to vote, and women were denied that, she was very angry. And she was quoted as saying something, I would rather give my right arm than give the Negro man the right to vote before women. And that affected their friendship a great deal. That affected their friendship. Yeah, and so, and Frederick Douglass was he made a very good point about why are men speaking about women's rights? Men are gathering and talking about women's rights. Men should remain silent and let women decide and let women speak. In other words, he was the first to say, stay in your lane.
19th century, yeah. What a pioneer, Right,
So, yeah. But I loved doing this for this is the last few days of Black History. And when we talk about all of the self-made men, we speak of Solomon Northup, Henry Brown Fox, Murray Prince, James Williams, Charles Pennington, John Brown, of course, Henry Bibb, William and Ellen Craft. And these are people who, self-made millionaires throughout history that we don't know about. Even inventors that we know about, black inventions. A black man invented the stoplight. That wonderful piece I accentuated. It was Malcolm, Martin, Jesse, all that in that history right there. And we say, I'm black and I'm proud. You say it loud. So last night's incident with the racist Lyft passenger, it just seemed like the universe was reminding me why we are doing this. And sad fact of the matter is it was wasted on this drunken fool, and but he's but one person, and he's but one person. And one of the reasons why we're doing this, I'm not sad that we can't reach a person like him, because for every one person we can't reach, there are 10 people we can speak and educate, and who will be motivated and empowered to educate themselves. That's the whole idea of being self-made. When Frederick Douglass says, I want to give you the tools to emancipate yourself. That's what education is. Education means to draw out, to draw forth. So there's a principle in the Baha'i faith, my religion, that says that regard man as a mine rich in gems of inestimable worth. Education alone can cause it to reveal its treasures and allow humanity to benefit therefrom.
Wow, that's a very beautiful link, and link with what we just relearned or learned about Frederick Douglass and this amazing gift of education, Tony. Thank you. Thank you. And you know what? I would like to hear from your voice a last paragraph of his conference in 1872. This is the end about this self-made man, because once again we want to say it loud. Frederick Douglass invented this expression.
Yes.
so important these days and for forever. So can you please give your voice?
Absolutely. I am here to talk to you about self-made men. Properly speaking, there is no such man in the world. This term implies an individual independence from the past and the present that can never exist. No generation of men can be independent of the previous generation. The brotherhood and interdependence of humanity are guarded and defended at all times. I believe in individuality, but individuals are, for the masses, like waves for the ocean. The highest level of genius is as dependent as the lowest. Like the highest waves of the sea, it derives its power and grandeur from the size and immensity of the ocean of which it is a part. We differ like the waves, but we are like one sea. We are one like the sea. To do well does not necessarily mean to be able to do everything as well. If you can do in a way what I cannot do, I can, in another sense, be able to do what you cannot do. Thus, the balance of power is maintained relatively equal, and a self-operating fraternity and interdependence are maintained.
Yes, and you know this Frederick Douglass showing this how much the intervention of good, bad, masters, mistress, friends, enemy, he really explains how that he reached his highest potential without he couldn't have reached his highest potential without the intervention of every single man and woman he met, and also what he calls providence. And
Absolutely.
this is the global vision he has, and always this interdependence is very key to me. His vision and his message today, especially today. So yes, I would like to thank Frederick Douglass for this lesson of humility.
Frederick Douglass, yes.
And thank you, Tony, for giving your voice and being with me today and passing on this message. I'm very happy about that.
And thank you, Nirina, for putting this all together with your skill, your determination, your intelligence, and your love. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony. We will see each other another time for sure.
Yes.
In present, I hope we have the plan with Tony, just to let you know, to the viewers, that we have the plan to create more conferences like interactive and readings, and getting back to the books and to the writings of these amazing figures, men and women that are not so well known, but I hope that you knew Frederick Douglass for many times more
Absolutely. Yes. You know, we can learn about Toussaint Louverture and Thomas Alexandre Dumas, the father of Alexander Dumas. And Thomas Alexander Dumas, he was enslaved, brought from Haiti to France, educated, and became the highest ranking European general, a direct rival to Napoleon.
That's amazing, these lives. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
So we need to learn more, to review, to discover, and to share this.
Absolutely.